Good morning. Good morning. I'm back and I'm continuing our series, Portraits of the Past. And today we are going to find out who Jacob marries. We are continuing the series down from Abraham. Abraham sent his servant away to his country to find a wife for Isaac. Isaac marries Rebekah. Rebekah and Jacob. Rebekah and Isaac, they have two boys. They are Jacob and Esau. And Jacob steals Esau's blessing after he steals his birthright. And so Rebekah has to send him away back to her home country so that he can find a wife for himself, so he can flee from his brother who wants to kill him. So if you think that sounds like a soap opera, it's going to really start to sound like a soap opera today. You're not going to want to miss today's lesson of Jacob getting a wife for himself. So of course, he is on his journey. Last time in the last video, we talked about Jacob resting his head at Bethel and seeing God and the angels of God going up and down a stairway in a dream. So of course he names that place Bethel, and he continues his journey. This is where we last left off, with Jacob continuing his journey back to his mother's people, back to Abraham's people, so that he can find a wife. So this is the journey that he takes. And so he comes to a well also. It's kind of like a replay of what happened with the servant and Rebekah. But Jacob is the one who comes to the well, and he sees some shepherds there. And they are waiting at the well to water their sheep. But they are waiting till everyone else comes to remove the stone that's over the well so they all can get the water together. And this is not the same well that the servant met Rebekah at. This is a different well. This is outside of Nahor, the town of Nahor. And so this is where our story starts. And Jacob asked the shepherds where they were from. And they say, Haran. So the other place was outside of Nahor. So this is outside of Haran, or some people call it Haran, or Haran, or however you want to spell it, or however you want to say it. It's Haran, okay? I like to call it Haran. So Jacob comes to a well, and Jacob asks the shepherds where they're from. They say Haran. So he asks them, do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson? Do you know Laban, my mother's brother? Laban, all right? So, yes, we know him, they answer. And so he knows that he's in the right place. Now, Jacob, he's traveling on this journey. He's going from Beersheba to Haran. It's 450 miles, about 15 days journey, if he's doing about 30 miles a day. So he has been on this journey for 2 weeks, and he's finally gotten to where he thinks he belongs. All right? So he asked them, do you know Laban? This I do, they say. Jacob asked them, is he well? Yes, he is, they said. And here comes his daughter, Rachel, with the sheep. So here comes his beautiful daughter, Rachel. She is a shepherd. She is taking care of the sheep. And this is, like I said, history repeating itself at the well. So while he was still talking to them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was the shepherd. And where Jacob saw her, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well right away and watered his uncle's sheep. So this is kind of the opposite, where Rebekah watered the camels of the servant. Here is Jacob. He is going right up, and he is being very kind and courteous and grateful that he has met somebody who is a relative to him. And he is going to water all of Rachel's sheep. So then Jacob kissed Rachel, and he began to weep aloud. Now this kiss was a kiss of greeting. It was a customary kiss of courtesy and civility. This was his cousin, after all. This was his family, and this is what they did. This was the custom. So he went because his journey was over to her, and because he finally found his father's relatives, he wept. So he was so grateful. He was overwhelmed with emotion. So he tells Rachel that he is her relative and he is the son of Rebekah, and she runs and she tells her father all of this information. So he comes out and he greets him. He embraces him with a hug and he kisses him and he brings him into his home. Of course, he gives him a meal. He takes care of him. He is a guest in his home. What Jacob does is start to work for Laban. Of course, not for wages at this point, but he starts to work for Laban, and he's just kind of hanging out at Laban's house for a while. And after about a month, Laban comes to him and says, I can't have you here working for me for nothing. What do you want for wages? What do you want me to pay you? So this is where things get interesting. This is where things get really interesting, because Laban has two daughters. The older one's name is Leah and the younger one's name is Rachel. Now, Leah has something about her eyes that is different, that causes the writer to write down that she has weak eyes. So something about her appearance is different. And then there's Rachel, who has a wonderful figure and who is beautiful. And of course, Jacob is in love with Rachel, right? Jacob probably fell in love with Rachel the moment he saw her at the well. Now, like I said, we don't know what the weak eyes mean, but of course, Rachel was the pretty one, and Jacob was in love with her. And Jacob says, I will work for you for 7 years. He must have been really in love. I will work for you for 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel. Now, wives had to be purchased in the East during this time. This was the custom. They were objects of value, and parents were used to receiving expensive gifts in return for their daughters. Jacob had brought no expensive gifts with him. If you remember the servant brought Rebekah gifts. The servant gave the parents gifts, gifts all around, flowing out of those bags that were on the camels. Now, Jacob has nothing to give but his own personal service to his uncle for a wife. And this is what he does. Now, the uncle, he needs a good, strong man to be a shepherd, to take care of his sheep, to, go to the well and move that stone away. He needs a good, strong man. I was watching Andy Griffith the one time, and then this was a really funny episode. Andy had saw this young woman who wanted to dabble in some makeup and some beauty supplies and things like that, but her father didn't want her to. And in order to convince her father to let her use the makeup and the beauty supplies the pharmacist wanted to give to her, they dolled her all up and made her look pretty. And then they took her to the father and they said, Frankie, the girl's name was Frances, Frankie makes a fair farmhand, but when she gets married, son-in-law makes an excellent farmhand. And in this case, a son-in-law would make an excellent shepherd. And that is exactly what happened. So something to notice here is that Rachel is not consulted. She belongs to her father. When she marries Jacob, she will belong to him. And this was the culture of the day. Women didn't have any rights at all. They weren't educated, of course, back then. There was all these menial labor jobs that the men did and the women helped out with. But there was no status for women in the Old Testament in these times. So Laban said, it's better I give you to her than to some other man. Stay here with me. So he works. He works for the 7 years. And the night of the day of the wedding, the bride is veiled in a very long concealing veil for the entire day until the wedding night. And so the bride goes into the wedding chamber and the husband comes to be with her on the wedding night. And this is exactly what happened here at Laban's house. And so what Laban does is he tricks Jacob. He takes his daughter Leah, the one with the weak eyes, the one who is not as attractive as Rachel, and he puts her in the veil, and he puts her in the bridal chamber. And this is who Jacob marries that day. He marries Leah, and he doesn't know he's with Leah until the next morning when he wakes up and he says, "It is Leah here in the bridal chamber." So of course Jacob goes to his uncle and he says, "What is the meaning of this? I bargained for Rachel, and you have given me Leah." And this is where we see that all of the deception that Jacob embraced back when he was with his mom, all of that deception is catching up with him, because now his uncle has deceived him into marrying the older daughter who was not as attractive. So it is customary in those days, and that this is exactly what the uncle tells him. The uncle says, "It is our custom for the oldest daughter to be married first. And so in order to get Rachel, you will have to work another 7 years. I will give her to you at the end of the bridal week, but you have to work for me for another 7 years." And that's exactly what Jacob does. Jacob has to work the 7 years. At the end of the bridal week, he gets to marry Rachel 1 week from the day that he marries Leah. So now he has 2 wives. This is not what God intended for a man to have 2 wives. Of course, in the Genesis narrative, we see that God shows us that there is 1 woman for each man, and that is God's intent in married life. So a man is not to marry more than 1 woman, right? So this is the situation that Jacob finds him in at the end of his 2 bridal weeks. He has these 2 women that he is married to, and he has to work another 7 years for his uncle. I want to see you back here next week. We're going to continue this saga of the Old Testament portraits of the past. I want you to have a wonderful, wonderful day and a wonderful weekend.